Hello and welcome to the webinar, Why Accessibility is Important in the Digital Age. I'm See Wah Cheng, a Senior Product Manager at Onfido. I'm here with Charlotte, our Product Design Lead, and Sergio, our Senior Software Engineer. To give some background before we start, Onfido is an identity verification company. In short, we prove identity. Everyone has an identity, so making sure our product, and in particular our SDK, which captures document and face images, is accessible, has become a particular focus for us. We are going to talk through what accessibility is, how it impacts us, what the business impact can be of ignoring it, and a little bit about our journey and what you can learn from our experience. Accessibility means designing products and services for people with disabilities so that they can have the ability to access and benefit from such products and services. For me, this also echoes strongly the Onfido vision, an open world where identity is the key to access. It would be morally wrong for us to exclude people with disabilities from this open world. So the term inclusive design is often mentioned in the context of accessibility. Accessibility is one aspect of inclusive design, focusing solely on disability inclusion, while the broader concept of inclusive design may extend to various areas such as economic, language, and cultural inclusion. So what forms of disabilities may a user of a product be suffering from? They may have visual problems and they cannot see very well. They may have hearing or speech issues. They may have motor issues whereby they cannot make certain muscle movements. And finally, they may have cognitive issues where they may struggle to remember, to learn, to concentrate, or to make decisions. The following 3 slides illustrate the effect of certain vision impairments. Developing cataracts can cause a person's sight to become cloudy and misty, as this slide here shows. Another common sight issue is called glaucoma, which is caused by pressure building up inside the eye, affecting optical nerves. A sufferer may have restricted vision like this. And finally, retinopathy is damage to the retina, often associated with diabetes. A sufferer's vision may become blurred or patchy. So let's look at how many people suffer from accessibilities. It is estimated that 1 in 5 people in the UK and the US suffers from some form of disabilities. Furthermore, disabilities can be permanent, temporary, or situational, as illustrated by this diagram from Microsoft Design. And just a few months ago, my wife had an accident which meant she had to have her arm in a sling for a couple of weeks. Her movement was greatly restricted, and everyday tasks became very challenging. Luckily, it didn't take long for her to recover. But it really made us think about how disability, first of all, how disability can impact everyone. And secondly, how we often take things for granted and do not consider the needs of people with disabilities enough. So knowing that disability is more common than most people would initially think, why is it getting so little attention in digital product design? But before we answer that question, I would like to first talk about a real-world, i.e. non-digital example of accessible design, the dropped curb. As you can see in this photo, a dropped curb is a small ramp built into the curb of a pavement to make it easier for people with wheelchairs or mobility scooters to pass from the pavement to the road. And it was introduced in towns and cities as far back as the 1930s. Not only do dropped curbs benefit wheelchair users, They also make it easier for other users, such as parents with prams, to navigate crossings. And last but not least, they encourage pedestrians to cross the road at the safe location. Yes, most of us barely notice it, and you probably step off one when you leave your house every day without even knowing it. And in my opinion, it is often these little things in life that make all the difference. So if we look around us, we can see accessibility support has become an integral part of the standard building design practice. However, the same cannot be said for digital products. If you have ever had the chance to observe how a visually impaired user tries to use new apps or websites, you will immediately see how challenging it is for them. So while we have seen truly incredible progress in technology in recent years, accessibility support seems to be lagging behind in apps, in mobile services, and on physical devices. And frankly, digital product teams looking to ship fast have often been ignoring the needs of people with disabilities in their design and implementation. And in the meantime, the regulators are struggling somewhat to catch up. But digital accessibility is more important now than ever. Voluntarily or involuntarily, our lives have become more and more dependent on technology. Those who cannot adopt become left behind. And as companies invest more on digital services and cut costs on non-digital alternatives, for example, high street bank branches closing down, a lack of good accessibility support can have a real impact on those who cannot access digital services. The average age of digital product users is also going to increase. Older people tend to develop visual, hearing, speech, motor, and cognitive issues. So many of them are already struggling to learn new digital skills. The lack of accessibility support is only going to make their lives even more challenging. So hopefully you can all see the moral need to support people with disabilities and build products with better accessibility support. But this needs time and money. And how do we sell it to the business? It may not be easy, but there are a couple of points that you can consider. First of all, the spending power of disabled households in the UK is estimated to be £250 billion. That can translate to a significant missed revenue opportunity for your business. Also, consider the legal aspect. All public sector bodies are already governed by the accessibility regulations, which prescribe clear digital accessibility requirements. Now, private sector bodies are exempt from this, but they're still subject to the Equality Act, which outlines that any business that provides goods or services must make reasonable adjustments to ensure anyone can access their services. This act is less prescriptive about what digital accessibility support means. However, a business can still be taken to court if a user with disability is being discriminated against. I hope this has given you a pretty good overview of why accessibility matters. I'm now going to hand it over to Charlotte to tell you more about our journey towards accessibility.
Hello, my name is Charlotte. I'm a product design lead at Onfido. I'm going to talk to you about the journey we took at Onfido towards accessibility. So we started a few years ago to try to make our product more accessible. So the first step we took is reading the accessibility guidelines, WCAG. Those are web and mobile, basically digital products guidelines that are defining four major principles around accessibility. So all digital products must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And there's 3 levels of accessibility, from level A to triple A. So at Onfido, we started to try to reach level double A before taking a step further and trying to reach the level triple A, which is the highest level of accessibility. So let's just take a brief look at our product. So we are developing, one of our products is an SDK, so it's embedded in our clients' apps. So we have mainly selection screens and a few camera screens, which are particularly challenging to make accessible. We started our journey as well with experts in the accessibility field. So we worked with Digital Accessibility Center and the Royal National Institute of Blind People. They really helped us understanding the guidelines. They helped us learning more about accessibility and the diversity of it. And they also audited our current SDKs, our current products, to help us understand what was the major problems and what we had to change. So this really helped us having a direction. We also tried to promote accessibility at Onfido so that it becomes a company-wide initiative. So we did workshops to build empathy. So for example, we got simulation glasses to make people try to use digital products with a simulation of visual impairment. We did a few hackathon projects around accessibility, and we did a few presentations to the whole company to raise awareness. I want to deep dive a bit more in what we did in terms of design at Onfido around accessibility. And my first point is that accessibility is way more than just the color contrast. So that's the first thing we think about when we talk about visual accessibility. It's having a good color contrast. It's obviously a good way to start, checking that all the text and all the contrasts are good, but it's not the only way to achieve accessibility. So what we did at Onfido is we tried to leverage the assistive technology and the accessibility features that are already existing on mobile devices. So for example, screen readers. There's on almost all mobile phones, you have a screen reader feature built in the phone, but it doesn't work just out of the box on every app. You need to make sure your app is written in the best way possible to leverage this technology in an elegant way. So for example, here, all the text will be read by the screen reader, and the text on the button will be read as a button. So the screen reader will say passport button, double tap to activate, so that people understand they can action this button, and it's not just a content text. So this is one thing we did. We also tried to improve the text size control. So that's something you can do as well from the native phone, is to increase or decrease the size of the text. This can obviously break an interface to have a text that's too big or too small. So we had to make sure all of our screens would act nicely and would display the text in a clear way, even if it got bigger. So we had a few design challenges along the way. The first one is that the guidelines, the accessibility guidelines, are open to interpretation. So for example, they can be followed, the boxes can be ticked, but this doesn't mean that the product will be entirely accessible. For example, if you rely only on screen reader features, your product will be understandable and discoverable and robust through the screen reader, but a lot of people with disabilities don't use the screen reader. So this could tick a few guidelines, but it wouldn't actually make the product really accessible. And also sometimes the guidelines don't make sense for a specific product or feature. This is our case with the SDK that is very much action-based and not really content-based. So the product our users have to use requires them to do actions and not only read content. So for example, they need to take a picture of an identity document, they need to take a selfie, or they need to take a video of their face while they're moving. So those are things that are already quite complex for everyone, and they can be even more complex and almost impossible for people with disabilities. So we had to find ways to explain those actions and to make people understand and to allow them to use our product. Another design challenge is that accessibility is really a journey. Staying compliant over time is hard, so every new feature, new iteration must be tested for accessibility, and we really need to have accessibility at the center of our design and development process. So one thing, for example, we implemented on the design team, we created screen reader specifications. So the goal is to help developers to write a better way for the screen reader to read the screens. So we have screens with the order of the text to be read, and we have a spreadsheet that would reference those strings to be read. We also have a few non-visual elements that need to be read. For example, the camera feed we're showing in the app needs to be described. For someone, for example, who doesn't see, they won't be able to know there's a camera there and the phone is filming. So we need to describe that, which actually created a few technical writing challenges because we need to be as specific as possible while keeping the text quite short because people are still navigating through the app. Another thing we implemented is the text behavior guidelines. So as I mentioned earlier, it's possible to increase or decrease the size of the text. This can break the UI. So we wrote extensive guidelines on how the text should behave and how the interface should behave if the text is bigger or smaller. And which element of the screen takes priority, or all this type of stuff to have a nice looking UI, even if the text is huge, for example. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sergio for the technical challenges.
So hello, my name is Sergio. I'm a software engineer here at Onfido, focusing on our mobile SDKs. Okay, so first of all, as Charlotte said, our SDKs heavily relies on UI and UX to allow our users to perform their identity verification. And also, many parts of this UI are custom components whenever the framework built-in design toolkit is not enough to fulfill our needs. So as an example, at the top, we can see a standard Android button, and at the bottom, we see a custom button built by us in order to address a specific need of having this more complex button layout that the default solution could not provide. Also, as Charlotte explained before, when working with custom components, we also need to add some logic to make them behave as if they were a standard one. Following this example, when the device screen reader is enabled, the top button will be by default read continue, or wherever text is displayed button. Double tap to activate. On the other hand, the bottom component by default will be read as passport only, because it's just the only piece of text present in this layout. This said, we had to add some logic to make it being announced as passport button, double tap to activate, making all the users understand that this is actually a button. Okay, next I would like to talk about the immaturity of the accessibility APIs, at least with regards to the Android ecosystem. One of the main pain points is that Google only very recently started investing into the built-in accessibility support APIs, making them available with the latest versions of Android. However, oldest versions still rely on incomplete or buggy APIs. So just as an example, an API that allows developers to define the order of traversal of the elements in their screen, as you said in our as you saw in our screen reader specifications, it was only made available in March 2015, and it's not usable by devices launched before that. Also, Android has this classic fragmentation problem. There are many different devices from different brands, and these brands control which versions of the operating system get rolled out to their devices. And usually a device doesn't receive more than 2 or 3 Android updates, so causing that many devices get stuck with old versions and they cannot benefit from the latest features. Currently, this fragmentation problem and the amount of users stuck with old Android versions forces us to support 13 different versions, which means that we can only rely on the features that were either available 13 versions ago or that were later on backported by the Android team. And with regards to accessibility, there were not many backports, since nowadays it's not the most popular feature to implement in an application. Finally, the screen reader on Android follows a life cycle that is completely independent from the view's life cycle, meaning that calling the screen reader to perform any action, like focusing on a specific view, is not guaranteed to work in multiple life cycle states of our applications. Okay, so in order to follow the guidelines for the accessibility standards we want to achieve, there were some edge cases we had to cover, which added a bit of complexity to some previously quite simple user flows. One example is this video we play before our users start recording their video selfie. Previously, our video was playing in loop, but in order to respect the guidelines, every content playing must be pausable if it plays for longer than 5 seconds. This way, we had to add a pause button and logic to pause and resume our video to avoid harming the experience of users with certain kinds of mental disabilities. Also, we had to review all the touch areas of our SDK to make sure their areas are big enough to respect the guidelines, because sometimes what looks better is not the most usable. And finally, picking up a bit what I referred in the previous slide about APIs immaturity, we had to add custom logic to implement our own element order, since the guidelines also state that the first element being read should be the title of a screen, something that identifies what the user should be expecting from that screen, in this case, record a selfie video. Finally, every piece of UI containing text in our SDK had to be reevaluated in the context of the screen where it's included, and we had to implement strategies on how this UI should grow in case the text it contains grows too. Also, we don't fully control the text that will be displayed in our UI components, since our clients can add their own custom text to either replace ours or to add translations for languages we don't support yet. So a good example is our custom button, the blue one in this image, which more than doubled in terms of lines of code in order to support the following complex behavior. First, being able to define a maximum percentage of the screen height that the button can take. Second, if the button text doesn't fit within a single line, allow it to grow until this maximum height is reached. And third, if and only if it doesn't fit, grow it until the maximum amount of lines that respects this maximum height, and add an ellipsis at the end of the text chunk that is able to fit inside the button. However, this added complexity ensures that we always do everything we can to present the content we want our users to see in the best possible way.
So thank you, Charlotte and Sergio, for the great insights. And we are just going to leave you with a few key takeaways. First of all, it is never too late to start looking at accessibility, but the earlier you start, the better it is. It is a lot easier to develop features with accessibility in mind than to retrofit accessibility later. And the best way to get started is to get your team familiar with the accessibility tools on your devices, such as the inbuilt screen readers mentioned before. They are usually found under the settings section on your phones. It is a great way to develop empathy with users who depend on these tools. And as Charlotte and Sergio demonstrated, accessibility is a discipline, and it should be a core part of your product development process. And always user test your product with a diverse audience, including those with disabilities. And finally, remember, you're in a great position to increase awareness within your organization, to educate others about accessibility. We here have done that in Onfido, and the feedback has been great. And yes, you can really make a difference. Okay, let's go over to live chat now and see some of the questions that are coming through. Okay, so let's look at this one. So the question is accessibility regulated by an authority, and who decides what is acceptable? So good question. As mentioned during the presentation, there are a couple of regulations and acts that that refers to well, that basically enforces accessibility. So first of all, there is the accessibility regulations that govern public sector bodies, and then there is the Equality Act that governs every organizations in the UK, really. And both of those are enforced by the Equality and Human Rights Commission in Great Britain and the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland. So I'm not a legal expert. I can't tell you exactly what that process looks like, but I guess if you're interested, you can read more about those acts and also what the Equality and Human Rights Commission, what they do. Cool. Okay, let's take another question. So the question is, what changes have you made to your day-to-day development process, and how has that changed lead times? Well, that's a great question, and to be honest, I think for us it's still a learning process. We're still trying to really understand how much is impacting our work. I think it's fair to say that we have spent quite a bit of time on the kind of initial research and process refinement to get us to where we are, and that is overhead, no doubt, on an ongoing basis, and but we anticipate that the overhead should diminish over time as thinking about accessibility becomes second nature to us. And also the great work that Sergio and the rest of the engineering team has done to build a solid framework for supporting assistive technology integration should mean the overhead should just diminish over time. So I think that's all we've got time for today. So if you can send us any more questions or inquiries, please do send them, and we'll get back to you directly. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you very much. We hope it has been useful, and we look forward to hearing feedback from you all. So goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.